and the Holy Spirit. Auntie Gladdy interrupted our prayer. Maybe that's her prayer. That's the only word she knows how to say. Okay, so welcome back to the third installment, I think, of the Wisdom of Jesus, the Son of Sirach. And today, it's a great shame that we'll be talking about shame and honor. So what do those words mean to you, shame and honor? What I've done today is I've basically just got a bunch of little verses from, different bits and pieces of Sirach. And they kind of look at the question of shame and honor, like from different sides. So I'll start by just giving you like a really brief sort of introduction. But I want to use tonight as a kind of an exercise in actually taking a verse and trying to delve into it and really sort of see what we can get from it, what we can learn from it. Not one, there's a few verses we're going to practice on, but they're all around this theme of shame and honor. So just by way of introduction, I think a lot of us are very used to measuring ourselves against the expectations of a community or of other people. And I think this is one of the sort of important meanings of, shame and honor are kind of the opposite of each other, right? Shame is when the community disapproves of you or of your action or something like that. And honor is when the community approves and applauds your action or you yourself or whatever it might be. And I think often when we think of shame and honor, that's mostly how we think of it. But it is important to remember that shame and honor can also be internalized, that sometimes we feel them even when nobody else is around or nobody else even knows or sees what we've said or done. And sometimes shame if we've done something bad, or internal honor if we feel that we've done something good. So there's kind of those two dimensions. There's the inside, and then there's kind of the outside, being part of a community. And so, we can speak of the measuring myself against the expectations of the community, but also measuring myself maybe against my own expectations. And the two, I think, are very much linked, because I think whatever we do internalize, it often does reflect the values of the community in which we live. The things that make people ashamed or feel honored today in Sydney in 2021 are not the same things that made people feel ashamed or dishonored, say, in Egypt in 1921. Or in Athens in the year 21 AD. Different cultures and different times have different values. I'll just digress a little bit here, because I was amazed when I learned this. But one of the things that we kind of take for granted today is that humility is an honorable thing. It's good to be a humble person. And I was shocked to discover that in the ancient world, humility was actually considered to be a weakness. It was considered to be a vice, a failing, a bad thing in a personality. You were meant to promote yourself, because if you are deserving of honor, then you should seek honor. That was the right thing to do in the ancient world. That's just one example of and that's actually a change that Christianity brought about. And thankfully, I think it's a very good thing that we do value humility now. But it's just hard to imagine a world in which, humility is something to be ashamed of. Oh, you terrible person, you're being humble. How can you do that? That kind of doesn't make any sense to us these days. But that was how, before Christianity, that is how the world used to think. So this raises the question, and I'm not going to answer it now. If you guys want to have a go at it as we, progress, please do. Does this mean that shame and honor are not reliable guides to what is really good and evil? If different cultures value different things and make people ashamed, if something like humility can be a matter of shame in one culture and a matter of honor in another culture, well, where does the truth lie? And that makes us question then in our own community, how do we know that our own time and our own culture and our own community, how do we know that we've got the settings right? Could it be that maybe there are things in our community that are valued that maybe in God's eyes are not really valuable? And maybe there are things in our community about which we make people ashamed, and maybe in God's eyes they shouldn't, they wouldn't be feeling ashamed. I'll just leave that question hanging for you at the moment. By our nature, we always desire honor and escape shame, right? I think that's sort of human nature. We want to be honored. There is something very deeply imprinted in our human nature that makes us feel good when we are honored, whether that be externally or internally. And there is also the opposite of that inside us as well, that makes us feel very uncomfortable when we are shamed. We go to amazing lengths to avoid being shamed. And when it does happen, we feel very bad about life. But I want to ask another question tonight. Is honor always necessarily a good thing? Can honor actually not be a good thing for you in your life? And the other side of that coin is shame necessarily always a bad thing for you? Can it actually play a good role in your life? Again, maybe we'd like to come back to that later on. And the last question I want to raise today is, how much attention should we give to shame and honor? Should we care about what other people think of us at all? I think for a lot of us, the most common way that we kind of end up doing the right thing rather than the wrong thing is because we have this constant calculation going on in our heads. If I do this thing, will it bring me shame? And I don't want that. Or will it bring me honor? And I do want that. And we have lots of, we're very complicated when it comes to this. We have lots of ways of dressing it up and, finding different ways to express it to ourselves and different ways to justify it to ourselves, because we are Christian and we do value humility. And if you're humble, then you shouldn't be running after honor. And yet, I think if we're, really honest with ourselves, that is often a motivation in what we do. It is often part of our motivation, at least, that, if people saw me doing this, they would think I was good because I'm doing this. And of course, our parents played no small part in developing this way of thinking in us, because often the way that they got us to be good little boys and girls was to alternate between shame and honor. How many times, those of you who speak Arabic at home, or your parents did, have you heard the word aib? How do you translate aib? What would that be? Shame? It is kind of shame. It's like when someone wags their finger at you and says shame, shame, shame. Or is there a better translation?
Wrong.
Wrong. Yeah, but see, aib is not, it's not sort of wrong, just like purely wrong, is it? It's wrong that other people see and call out as being wrong. Rude, yeah, it's more like rude.
Rude, rude, yes, rude, yeah.
Like you're going to offend people or something like that. Isn't it rude? Oh, yeah, so you're agreeing, yeah. Yeah, it's something like that, right? So what, the idea of rudeness is that you are shaming yourself in front of other people, right? They will think you are rude. They will think that you are bad. And Why does that parental strategy work so well? Because there is this thing built into our psychology, our way of thinking and dealing with life, which is very sensitive to shame and honor, and which reacts very quickly and very strongly, often even before we've had time to actually think it through. The reaction is already there. That's sort of how deeply ingrained it is in our way of thinking. But should we? I mean, isn't Christianity about seeking the truth, seeking the good, and not caring about what other people think? So the last question I want to leave you with before we dive into the discussion is, how much should the Christian worry about what people think of them? Is it a valid motivation for us? Or is it a motivation that we should avoid? Okay, so hopefully I've got the cogs turning a little bit by now, let's hope. And let's dive in, shall we, to our first passage. So I am allowed to share my screen. Thank you very much. And let me find the right one. And okay, yeah, here we go. Okay, our first verse, 2 verses. This is about good and bad shame. Is there such a thing as good shame? Is there such a thing as bad honor? For there is a shame that brings sin, and there is a shame which is glory and grace. So I'd love you guys to start talking now. What is he saying here in this verse? For there is a shame that brings sin, and there is a shame which is glory and grace. What's the first one first? What kind of shame could bring sin? How could that work? So, sorry, I'll just stop sharing there, because then we can see each other, which is helpful when we talk. What does it mean that there is a shame that brings sin? Do I have to shame someone into having a go? If you have a go, you will be honored. Come on, stop the agony of these stupid dad jokes.
I think when your last comment about being honored may have turned some people off. They want to be humble.
Yeah, go, Mark.
I was going to say, well, based on the brief description that you mentioned at the start, how shame and honor are kind of byproducts of expectations, cultural expectations or self-expectations. I guess the shame that leads to sin could be born of pride, in the sense that I expect a certain level of myself and haven't reached it, which kind of, brings me to be a little bit ashamed. But who's to say that that level is my level? Maybe I'm kind of thinking too highly of myself.
Okay, so you're saying that in a weird sort of way, shame can actually lead to pride? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, or is a byproduct of pride.
Okay, it's the other way around. Like the pride kind of is the cause of the shame and reveals the shame. The shame reveals the pride kind of thing.
Yeah. I don't know if that's the only instance of shame maybe becoming sinful or leading to sin.
Okay, now that's a good opening volley.
Thanks.
Okay, who else?
Abuna,
Yeah.
like when you were talking about in the past, like there were thinking of like they wanted people to be proud or that type of thing. I'm thinking as well, like it's hard because in the society at the moment as well, there is still a bit of like when you go for interviews, you kind of put yourself out there. So like I don't like when you're talking about the past and present, kind of find they're similar. The Christian comes in, but in the same time, there is that similar pride in both.
Yeah, I agree with you. And I think that's an indication that, people talk about how we are living in a post-Christian world now. And in a sense, in some ways, I think our society is kind of slowly drifting back into paganism in some ways. And maybe that's one of the ways I think that we see that humility in some areas of, businesses and industries and so on, humility is not valued. It is starting to be seen again as a kind of weakness almost. And that's kind of sad. And I'm old enough to remember that it wasn't like that. Back in the 70s, it was just starting. The 1980s, that really, really took off. They call it the me decade, when people started becoming very self-absorbed again and stuff like that. Sorry, but we've kind of wandered off from the idea of shame. Oh, but you're talking about honor, which is okay. Yeah, honor is, that's half our topic tonight. Okay, but let's go back to our verse here. Okay, for there is a shame that brings sin. Can anyone think of a situation where shame actually causes sin?
I had just had a thought, and I thought, and the thought is maybe comparing yourself to other people. So I might look at my neighbor and say, well, look at that house, or look at that car, and say, I can't afford that, or I'm not as good as them. And I start to covet their goods. Yeah,
okay. That's a great example. Yes, so leading to the sin of greed, in a sense. And that's a really good example, Bishoy, because that's kind of that, deeply ingrained sense of, I have to prove myself. And for a lot of the time, that means I have to prove myself in the sight of others. It's almost like if I achieved my achievements and nobody knew about it, then that wouldn't be, no, that's not what I want. And we never say that to ourselves so obviously, but it can be lurking in there. Okay, and any other sort of examples of shame that leads to sin?
Judging. So let's say, for instance, you may be serving with other servants and they might not be the ones fasting on Wednesdays, or they go the night before drinking, and then you see them on Sunday and all of a sudden, how dare they? Like, I don't know. Should they not have done that, or should they not be doing that because they are servants of the Lord, or they're, I don't know. I'm just thinking something like that, where you fell into sin.
Okay, so that's really good, because that's giving us like from in a different direction now. Now it's me making others feel ashamed that actually leads me into sin. And yeah, that's really good to point that out. I actually hadn't thought of that, but that's actually a really good point. Yeah, go, Magdi.
Well, it can be shame leading to sin, so that you've done something you're very ashamed of, and then that causes you to lose hope or to despair, or even sometimes you turn against God altogether. So to feel, so that you can run away from feeling the shame, you start to go against God, or God doesn't exist, or turn towards atheism, so that you feel better about yourself. So the best way you can feel about yourself is to ignore God's rules and God's word, to try and hide that shame.
Yeah. See, that discomfort of shame is a very powerful motivator to us to do things. But it can push us in the direction, say, of repentance. And, that's a good shame. But it can also push us in, directions like despair as well. Or, things like lying to cover up the thing that I'm ashamed of, hurting other people, stealing from other people, doing terrible things to other people just to cover so nobody finds out about this thing that I'm ashamed of. And eventually that, leads down the path of hypocrisy. I think that shame and hypocrisy are very closely connected in a lot of ways. Often, one of the reasons we act in hypocritical ways is because we are trying to escape the consequences of shame. And sometimes on the other side as well, because of a love of honor. So, I'm not that good a person, but I want to be honored. So I put on an act. And again, none of us ever says this to ourselves, but it's there in the subconscious, right? I do things and I tell myself I'm doing these good things because I really believe in them and because I care about other people and stuff like that. But somewhere in the dark corners of my heart, there is this desire, maybe people will see you and they will honor you and they will think you're a good person. And because there's that kind of lie behind the actions, then that is a kind of a hypocrisy. And of course, there are milder versions of that, and then there are really sort of extreme versions of that, I suppose. Okay, and there is a shame which is glory and grace, is the second part of that verse. That sounds a little bit like a contradiction, doesn't it? How could shame be glory and grace? And why does he choose those two particular words, glory and grace? How can shame be glory and grace?
I have imagery of the cross, like Christ being shamed, but yet being glorious and sharing his grace.
Right. So can you dissect that for us a bit more, Bishoy? What is the shame in the cross and what is the glory and the grace in the cross?
I guess the shame is the death and the embarrassment and the awful kind of death and being crucified with other, undesirables for our sake. And actually, I guess the spiritual context is Christ, carrying all the sins which are shame in themselves. But us receiving salvation, being restored through him, through his shame, I guess that's what I like about it, and sharing in the glory that he goes through and experiences because of the shame.
Beautiful. Yeah, no, I love that. That's such a good example, and it's a really good illustration of the relationship between love and shame. Love is kind of more powerful than shame. Love doesn't let shame get in its way and stop it. And so, yeah, the cross is the love of God for humanity. And he doesn't balk at the shame. He doesn't, he's not put off by the fear of the shame. But he happily, I don't know if happily is the right word, but willingly, voluntarily undergoes the shame. And that, in a way, that is the glory of the cross, isn't it? Because that amazing love that is willing to suffer that kind of shame is the glory. And yeah, that's beautiful. All righty, shall we move on to the next verse? Oh, sorry, was someone going to say something before we do?
I was going to say, like, it also gives me that visual of, there was a verse in the Bible that used to say, like, last is first and first is last. So how, like, if you're at the back of the church and then they take you up, so it's like you're putting yourself not in the right position and then they push you to the correct position. Or like when Jesus came from heaven and came down, he humbled himself, but he's meant to be in glory. So it's just the last is first and first is last type of vision.
Yeah, so I mean, the love we see embodied in Jesus kind of turns our human ideas of honor and shame upside down and inside out almost, doesn't it? And when he says things like, the last shall be first and the first shall be last, when he tells that parable about the workers, the guy goes out and hires people in the morning and then gets some more at, third hour and sixth hour. And finally he gets the ones at the 11th hour. And then he honors them all. He pays them all the same wage. He honors them the same. And everybody says, no, that's not fair, right? The ones who worked all day deserve the honor, the proper repayment for what they've done. This is unfair. And Jesus says, yes, love is unfair. It turns our ideas of what is just, what is shameful, what is honorable, inside out and upside down. Maybe then the gospel that Jesus taught us is the way that we get behind these changing cultural values of what is shameful and what is honorable. And we get to the real objective truth about, what is right and wrong that's behind those cultural values. All right, any other thoughts before we go on to the next verse?
Buna, at the risk of making things too long, there is a notion, though, I think maybe it's a secular notion, but that shame is like a toxic emotion along with like guilt. How does that fit into the second half of the verse?
That's such an interesting question. And can I just say, and look, I could be totally wrong about this, but just as an observation, I've noticed that often the same people who say exactly what you just said often use shame to sort of to get people to behave in ways that they want. Right. So I'm thinking of, the sort of the, modern sort of, I'm okay, you're okay, everyone's okay, we're all good. We should love ourselves and be kind to ourselves. And, shame is evil because it's how people manipulate you and control you and so on. Right. And often those very same circles are the ones who are calling people out for the things that they don't like racism and misogyny and the Me Too movement, which I think is important, right? There's people have been doing horrible things to each other and exercising their power in really bad ways for a long time and getting away with it. And I'm really glad that it's being stopped, right? But notice the whole strategy of naming people publicly. What is that actually doing? It's actually using shame, right? It's using shame as a weapon. And maybe that's a valid use. I don't know what you guys think about that, whether it is or it isn't. It certainly seems to be an effective weapon. But isn't it going against this idea of, it's actually kind of admitting that we're not all okay. That sometimes it is important to feel bad about what you've done and even about yourself. So I don't know. Sometimes I see like there's a contradiction there, or there may be a better way to put it is like there's a balance that needs to be found, because I think maybe shame, if taken in the wrong ways or if pushed too excessively, I think has those kinds of harmful effects that I think you're thinking about. But on the other hand, to not feel any shame at all, I think is probably just as bad, because, where is the role of conscience here? Where are we going to find some kind of motivation to, push us when in our worst and weakest moments, when we need the help of others to motivate ourselves to do the right thing? I don't know. What do you guys think? You can respond, Mark, if you do. Does that make sense or not really?
Yeah, it definitely does make sense. Yeah, I don't know. I've never thought of it as contradictory, but that is a good point. I think just coming back to what you said, whether naming and shaming is a good strategy, I would probably tend to kind of lean more towards that being not so much a good strategy. But yeah, no, it's definitely something to think about.
I noticed a frown on T's face there when you said that. Do you want to comment or not really? Okay, we won't. All right, let's move on to the next verse. Okay, so let's leave good and bad shame for a minute. We'll move on to the next point, honoring others. So should we honor others? Okay, we've been kind of talking about how shame and honor can be used for good or can be used for evil. Should you say nice things about other people? Is that a good thing to do or a bad thing to do? So let's have a look at the first one here. Do not show partiality to someone to your own harm, and do not let your respect for another cause you to fall. So do not show partiality to someone to your own harm, and do not let your respect for another cause you to fall. Is it possible that by honoring another person, that makes me fall into some kind of sin? And what kinds of honor do you think he's referring to? The hint being in the first line there. Anyone want to have a go? Can honor be partial? What does that mean? And he doesn't mean like, a part and not the whole thing. By partial, he means like biased, favoring some people over others. Is that bad?
So what was the first part? What was the partial part? What was it again?
It says, just let me get it up. I don't know why the computer keeps hiding it every time I stop. It says, do not show partiality to someone to your own harm.
So like, do not show bias to someone. So if you replace partial with so do not show bias to someone who would what, sorry?
Do not show bias towards someone.
Yep.
And then that will end up harming you.
Okay. Well,
it'll come back to bite you on some part of your anatomy.
Okay, so that's kind of a no-brainer, isn't it?
Sorry?
That's kind of a no-brainer, right? So
is it?
bias.
I mean, okay, when if you're at work, aren't you nice to your boss? And is that going to harm you if you're nice to your boss? Rocky's not nice to his boss, he says.
Yeah, I can see where you're getting going.
I mean, I think most people would think you should be kind of especially nice, particularly to people who can benefit you in some way. Yeah. Surely you end up winning out of that equation.
Yeah.
But Sirach seems to think that you might not end up winning out of that equation. What's he talking about? Yeah, go on.
Isn't it? It just says to your own harm, which means only if it leads to causing you harm. Isn't that right? Like partiality in a way that, like, for example, if you're an accountant and you have a very rich client, he might, to appease him, he might ask you to break some tax laws. So if you show partiality to him because he's such a big client of yours, making your business lots of money, then that will cause you harm because you're breaking the law, and just to keep him, you're thinking of doing that.
Yeah, and that's sort of supported, that interpretation supported by the second part, which is, and do not let your respect for another cause you to fall. So yeah, maybe that's what he's saying. Don't let your desire to honor people be a reason for you to then end up doing bad things. That could certainly be a way to understand it. I actually understood it in a slightly different way, though. And I'm sure both are possible.
Abuna, I had
Yeah.
like I was thinking more like in like say you're giving honor to someone and it's like exaggerating, and because of that later on maybe someone goes, oh wow, you're actually lying, and it will backstab you at the end or something, that type of thing.
Yeah. And I think that's sort of the line down which I was going as well, in a sense, that maybe the harm is not, I mean, as there's more than one interpretation, obviously, but maybe the harm is not that you will end up doing something wrong, but maybe the harm is just to your own character.
Or lose a friend.
Yeah. Your own relationships, your own integrity, your own conscience, things like that. And of course, in Australia, maybe it's because we live in Australia that I thought this way. We don't like crawlers. We don't like suck-ups. I don't know what the young people are calling it these days. I'm sure they have their own lingo. And in a sense, we feel that we are diminished in some way if we're doing that. And that's also a very Christian idea, right? Of loving everyone equally, not being partial. So not being partial to the rich or the powerful or the important just because they're rich and powerful and important. And not sort of looking down and ignoring the poor or the, those who don't have power just because they're poor or they don't have power. We don't, or as Christians, we shouldn't treat people that way. We are meant to love everyone equally and honor everyone equally, I suppose, in that sense of not just because of their station.
Abuna, what about down to personality level, or it's like you're more similar to this person, or you like some of their attributes? So it's not about power or skills, but it's just more likability.
Yeah. So I mean, what you're raising here is the question is, should we treat everybody absolutely exactly the same? Or is it actually okay to treat people according to their own, their own personality and how I kind of relate to that personality? So, I'm going to throw that to the floor. Would anyone like to give us their thoughts on that? Do we ever really treat everybody absolutely the same? I don't think we do in practice. We certainly don't, do we? So is that okay, or are we doing something wrong?
Abuna,
yeah.
Do you have the same exact relationship and love? I wouldn't say love for Pope Tawadros as you would for Abuna Pshoi or Abuna Butros?
What do you mean?
Well, time and service and relationship, that all impacts how you treat someone, right?
Yep, for sure.
That's my point. So I don't know if you can love them all equally and treat them all the same, because that is not the same. Your time with them and your relationship with them is not the same. Not saying bad or good, but I think these factor in how you should treat someone.
Yeah, and I think that's kind of what George is getting at, isn't it, George?
Yeah, Bona, like there's just you could easily look at your kids as well. It's you tend to align with people that are not aligned, but you relate to people that are a bit more similar to you with more similar personalities. So how do you not be partial? So it's actually an active effort to be partial. It's an active effort to be balanced with how you treat people, with how you spend your time, how your demeanor is with them, despite that it might not come naturally.
Yeah, and I think, I mean, what you've both said is perfectly sensible. And I think you're right about that. But remember, we're reading these verses where the topic that he's talking about is shame and honor. So if we take the example that T brought up, should I honor Pope Tawadros more than I honor, Abuna Pshoy in our parish? See, now you seem to be thinking, no, I shouldn't. But keeping in mind, I've spent a lot more time with Abuna Pshoy than I have with Pope Tawadros and stuff like that. Yeah, go ahead. Sorry. What were you going to say?
Oh, no, not more or less. I'm just talking about treating him, and the way you speak to him and the way you might communicate with him might not be the same. Do you know what I mean?
Okay, but what about honoring?
You should honor him only because I don't know, but like, he's definitely our leader. We look up to him, and he's our Pope. That we owe him respect and honor. And I think that's where I might stop talking. But yeah, I don't know. But when it comes to like priests and things like that, I just meant relationship wise. I don't know about honor more or less. I don't know if that's what I meant.
Can I just add? I think what you're trying to say is like every person is different, like, because your relationship is different, but it's not a less or more. It's more like I treat my parents different to my daughter, to my, like the relationship is different. Is that what you're trying to say? I think I'm getting it right.
But I'm just waiting for Bruno to tie in the honor, because I don't know, like, it's not less or more. I just don't know how. Yeah, I don't know. I don't know how to explain that. Sorry. I don't know how you're going to tie it in with what I've meant in terms of honor.
I think Magdi has something handy to say.
Yeah, well, just about the partiality, and I guess because when I read that verse, I thought of our church straight away, and I'm not trying to, but like when we have a bishop visit, or we definitely show partiality. Like obviously we give him a lot of respect and honor, and that's fine. But even like the way the church does things afterwards. So, for example, there'll be a meal upstairs just for the bishop and just for the priests and the people who are in the clique. And I know you hate that stuff, but this is what happens. And everybody else is outside waiting downstairs, not invited, not asked to come and eat, not sharing in the Arabi meal. So I feel if our church is going to, not our church as Mandrel, but the Orthodox Church, because that happens when the Pope comes to visit as well. He'll have his group that's around him, and they'll just follow him everywhere, and they get to touch him and whatever. But anyone that comes close, you're not allowed to know that. But our church definitely shows partiality, because I don't feel comfortable. Like when Abunas invite me to go, whatever, I don't feel comfortable being in that environment, because why should I be in that room? And I've got a lot of other people in our congregation who would love to be there too, but they're not there. And we've created partiality in the way we're treating not just the bishop, but even then who can hang around him, who can spend time with him, who can get close to him. That's partiality, I feel. Yeah.
I wonder if this is a cultural thing. Do you think do you think you're saying that, Magdi, because you're an Aussie? And that's, that's how we don't treat important people that differently. Whereas Egyptian culture is very different, isn't it? Middle Eastern culture is very different. And honor is a really important thing. Do you think that's why? Or
sorry, I think I was going to say it's not really a cultural thing, because like we have exec meetings where we can't go in, like they're talking business wise, or like there is a partiality in everything that we go through in life, I think. So it's not just cultural, it's business wise, everything.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, if someone important, comes to visit the school, I don't know, the Minister for Education or something like that comes to visit the school, do they treat the minister the same way we treat a bishop who comes to our parish? Probably. Okay, that's interesting to know.
And
Okay.
he hangs around like the execs more than going to teachers and stuff.
Yeah.
I have special room and meeting and things.
And then what happens when like a homeless person comes into our parish? Do we honor them? We don't. That's obviously an obvious answer. And yet we are, one of our patron saints is Saint Bishoy, where we have that lovely story about how all the other monks walked up the mountain and ignored the poor old man sitting there being annoying. And the saint, the one who met Christ, was the one who honored the poor old man and stopped and asked him what he wanted and carried him. So, I mean, there is an argument to be made, isn't there? That, okay, I think, I'm not saying we should make more of a fuss over the homeless person who comes asking for help than we should over the Pope. But maybe we just need to restore some of the balance. If we really understood, what it is to be a Christian community, I think we would. And I think I've mentioned to you guys before, haven't I, that if a Christian of the first century came to visit us on a Sunday when we weren't in lockdown, he would recognize the liturgy, he would recognize the Eucharist, he would recognize the fellowship and the love meal afterwards. But then he would say to us, but this is only half the church. Where are the widows? Where are the orphans? Where are the poor? Because the church is not complete unless you've invited them in and shared your food with them and shared your love with them. And that's sort of something that I think, thank God, I think we are slowly recovering that little by little. You guys all know, like, there's this G'day service where they actually do go out and look after the homeless and give them food and time and, and stuff like that, which is really, really nice. But yeah, hopefully we'll do more of that. Sorry, Mark, you have a hand up.
I was just going to say, I understand that partiality is definitely something that can be a negative, but when tying it to honor and should we honor everyone the same, I kind of always remember the verse. I'm going to paraphrase it because I can't remember off the top of my head, but it's something along the lines of the sun has a particular honor and then the moon has a different honor. And isn't it alluding to like saintly figures, how they are honored differently in heaven? And I guess my point is, isn't the Bible saying some will be honored more than others?
Yeah, I think you're right, and I think, I don't think that what he's saying is that we should not honor anybody and that we should not shame anyone. I think he wants us to practice shame and honor, but he wants us to practice them in a wise way, in a discerning way. So we should not honor the things that aren't really worthy of that honor. And we should not shame people for things that aren't really worthy of being shamed over. And sometimes I think, sometimes in our human way of thinking, we get that wrong. And that's why the honor goes wrong. That's why it's sort of, yeah. But look, I mean, is it wrong to honor a saint? Of course not, because there's something very worth honoring in the life of that saint. And it's a good thing for us. That's something that'll actually lead us to grow in our Christian life when we honor that saint. Should I feel ashamed over my sins when I confess them? Yes, I think I should. I think if I don't feel a sense of shame, then there's probably something a bit wrong with me. I'm missing the truth that what I've done is a bad thing and that I should be uncomfortable that I did it. Okay, so there is a very important and a valuable role for shame and honor. But I think what he's encouraging us to do is to try to learn how to practice them properly, not to misuse them, if that makes sense. Does that make sense?
Yeah. But can I just ask a quick question on something that you said? So you mentioned, should I feel ashamed from, if I do something wrong? And I couldn't help but feel that I feel like that stems from a legalistic approach to like sin. So because it's wrong, you should feel ashamed. But for example, we don't feel ashamed when we injure ourselves or when we, become sick.
Yeah, but I mean, often in those things, you didn't really have a choice in the matter, right? People don't go around injuring themselves on purpose or getting sick on purpose. Unless there is a very fascinating psychological condition called Munchausen syndrome. I'm sure you've seen it on TV, where that's actually exactly what they do. They get themselves sick on purpose. And it's a kind of a craving for attention. It's a way that, they get attention from doctors and stuff like that. Sorry, I digress again. But we didn't have a choice in being sick or being injured. Whereas I think we often do have at least some degree of choice in the sins that we commit. So I'm not really, I'm glad you pointed that out. That's a really good point you're making, that the shame is not the fact that I have sinned, but the fact that I'm still the kind of person who chooses to do that. And that's something that I have control over and that I should try to change. That I'm trying to become a person who doesn't want to do those kinds of things. That's, I don't know, maybe that's where the shame is properly targeted then, in that sort of case.
Well, wouldn't that lend an argument to the more Protestant view of salvation?
How do you mean?
Like the more legalistic approach that they take about sin and God's salvation, in that we transgressed the law of God. Hence, God had to come and pay off that punishment, that divine, the debt to the divine justice, so that we can hence be redeemed.
No, I don't think it has to be understood that way. It could also be understood in that my free choices have corrupted me and spoiled who I am. And I don't like that. I'm uncomfortable being so removed from God, in a sense, removed from what God made me to be. And that discomfort that I feel at having put myself in that situation is what I would be calling shame in this case. And the solution to that is for me to then be motivated to lay that shame before God and invite him to come inside and work within me and renew me. And that's exactly how we understand salvation.
Yeah.
Alrighty. Let me read just 1.5 more verses and then we'll finish up. Okay, just this second last one here. And we'll read that and then we'll just finish up with the one below it because I really like that last one. But before we get to that, if you have understanding, answer your neighbor. But if not, let your hand be over your mouth. There is glory and dishonor in speech, and a man's tongue may cause him to fall. So what's he saying here? Let's read through it one more time and then please someone just tell us what he's saying. If you have understanding, answer your neighbor. But if not, let your hand be over your mouth. There is glory and dishonor in speech, and a man's tongue may cause him to fall. Okay, what's he saying? I'll just leave it up, but please someone jump in.
Isn't there a, I think it's St. Augustine, but isn't he the one that says many times I've spoken and regret it, but I've never regretted silence or saying nothing?
Yeah, that's Amba Arsenius, I think, who says that. Yeah,
I'm paraphrasing hard, but
so how's that related to this verse then?
I think the way I understand it is like, if you know what you're talking about, then answer. If you don't know, don't guess.
Beautifully put. Yes, yeah, no, I think that's exactly it. Yeah, and again, how is this related to shame and honor?
I guess if you answer, you try and make it up, like you can look like a fool, hence bringing shame on yourself. But if you're answering because someone asked you, obviously they're asking you because they want help or they want an answer, then like like say for example, someone wants to know something about faith, or they want to know why you fast or why you pray on a Sunday or whatever it might be, and you're answering it just because they're asking, then that could like honor God through you.
Yeah. Isn't this such good advice? and I don't know, I feel, well, I don't spend much time on social media these days, but whenever I look into it, I feel this is really important advice for people on social media, because how often are people just spouting stuff and they don't really know what they're talking about, and they're saying it with great confidence, and in a sense they're not really bringing honor to themselves, are they? They're kind of bringing shame upon themselves. There is glory and dishonor in speech. So there is speech where you know what you're talking about, you say it clearly and properly and succinctly, and it's actually helpful to the people you're saying it to. Okay, that's good speech. That's what speech is meant for. And then there are all the other ways that we abuse speech, and often to other people's harm as well as our own harm. And like that verse, that thing that Rocky said, that quote, Yeah, sorry, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, like, I think, do you think that sometimes people speak because they're not comfortable with like silence? Like
what do you mean?
Like they're not, say if you're talking to someone, or if you're in a group setting and I guess that whatever was being discussed has now come to a close, but like someone might say something just because they're not comfortable being in the presence of someone else, and it's gone quiet. They don't like silence.
Yes, been there, done that.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Sometimes we do that because we don't like the silence. Sometimes we do it because we just think the other person's expecting me to say something. Oh, I'd better say something. What am I going to say? And then something stupid comes out because I have nothing. I don't actually have something to say that's useful. I don't want to be thought to be unfriendly. Sometimes it's just, I don't know. I suppose, gosh, this is a never-ending rabbit hole, isn't it?
But what if the intention of that person that can't stand the silence, as you've mentioned, their intention is to just lighten up the mood or, come across as friendly to make that other person feel accepted or not as awkward? Do you know what I mean? The intention is there, but the method is wrong. I don't know, or vice versa.
Yeah.
So I don't know if you can call that foolishness or dishonoring.
And I think that may be, one of the reasons why we get away with it sometimes. That we do say something stupid, but people, the person understands that we're doing it with the best of intentions. And so they're able to look past the stupidity. And that's, that's okay, isn't it? But yeah, I mean, there is something to be said, though, for learning the art or honing the art of good speech, with people. So that even if you are stuck in that sort of situation, you have resources you can draw on to find good words to say rather than, just blurting out something that's ridiculous. I don't know. I mean, that we could think a bit about the art of conversation, but that's not really our topic today. That's not what we're talking about. Let me finish up with that last verse, which I really like, and which is one of the verses that makes me think that Jesus, son of Sirach, actually had a sense of humor. He says, "A man who hides his foolishness is better than a man who hides his wisdom." A man who hides his foolishness is better than a man who hides his wisdom. I mean, normally we would think that it is better to be a wise man than to be a foolish man. True? He's kind of turning it backwards here. He's giving us a situation in which the foolish man's actually better than the wise man. What does the foolish man have to do to be better than the wise man?
Hide his foolishness.
Exactly right. Yes. Hide his foolishness. It actually made me think of a quote. I don't remember who said it. Maybe someone will know. It's better to keep your mouth shut and be thought to be a fool rather than to open your mouth and remove any doubt. So, yeah, go.
I was going to add, like, when I was reading that, I'm thinking, so, like, another thing I thought of is when a foolish man hides his foolishness, that's good. But if a wise man hides his foolishness, it's not good because we want his wisdom.
Yeah. So I think, let me
Which
just
is not good, like, as a teacher, like, not to tell people to teach. That's not good because we need teachers, or like we need Sunday school teachers or servants.
Yeah.
But if you hide that, like Anthony, if he hid his talents, we wouldn't have monks and all these, you know.
Yes. Let your light so shine before
Yeah.
men that they may see your good works and glorify your Father in heaven, and so on. Yeah, I think there's some sense in that. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I just thought I'd finish on that. I really like that. And it's a really good example, isn't it, of how this wisdom genre, the wisdom books, they often speak in riddles. You notice what we've had to do today? Like, we've had to read the verses like 2 and 3 times and kind of really think about it. And that's a really good illustration of how this wisdom literature works. It doesn't just give you facts. It actually draws you in and makes you ponder, make you think. And there are different ways of interpreting the same words. And that enriches our understanding of the topic because it does make us look at it from different angles. So I hope you're enjoying this book. But I'm having a ball. Anyway, is it Julie or Robert? I'm not sure who's behind the hand.
Donna, thank you for noticing that there's another partner to this name.
Well, the picture gave it away.
Yeah. I just had something to say with that last I guess verse or saying that you really like. It's thought-provoking because the foolish man who keeps his mouth shut, essentially, or hides his foolishness, that is wisdom. So it's kind of like a bit of a loop where it says, if you do that, that's better than someone who's, wise. But that is a form of wisdom to do that. So I don't know, I just found it funny that it's kind of circular a little bit. Yeah, I just thought I'd say that.
Yeah, I never thought of that, but yeah, I love that, Rob. That's really cool. In a sense, that is the variety of wisdom that even the foolish man has access to. You know, maybe he's not going to be wise enough to come up with amazing proverbs and, you know, solve the riddles of the universe. But simply by knowing that he's foolish and not, you know, putting himself into situations that he shouldn't be, that in itself is a kind of a wisdom. That's the wisdom he gets to practice. I love that. That's really cool.
Yeah, very interesting.
Okay. Any other thoughts before we
I
we
was
go
going to
to
say it's a
to-
balance.
what do you mean?
The middle path is a balance. It's good. Not like, yeah, balance it. Not talking too much, not talking too little.
Very true. Like most things in the spiritual life, it needs balance. Absolutely. Okay. Any last thoughts before we switch on Mimi's Kitchen? Sorry, Yaman, that's a much better name than Yaman's Kitchen. We're going to go with Mimi's Kitchen. Any last thoughts? Alrighty, lovely. Thank you all. So are you guys enjoying Sirach? Should we do a few more weeks, or do you want to go to something different?